as a matter of principle, I don't believe regulation stifles in innovation. Very often in my daily life, I work with technologies who feel that actually regulation gives them some guardrails that they actually appreciate as a matter of fact. I think, on the contrary, smart regulation that gets out in front of emerging technology can protect consumers and drive innovation. So my focus is on protecting consumers, and that I think is the most important thing. We're not just a huge, couple billion of mice in a lab. We are people with rights and dignity.
This is season 2 of Voices of the Data Economy, a podcast supported by Ocean Protocol Foundation. We bring to you the voices shaping the data economy and challenging it at the same time. Listen to founders, tech policy experts, and pioneers in impact investing, all sharing their relationship with data. So, hello and welcome. Today we have Julia with us. She is a privacy professional and AI governance expert. She's also a Mozilla Fellow in Residence and has been a German diplomat in the past. So, a very versatile profile. Hello, Julia.
Hi, Diksha.
Hi. Oh, I'm sorry. I said it wrong. Hello, Julia. I always
No worries.
I have American friends and German friends, and it's always confusing, but here we are, Julia.
Exactly. Fine.
So you are in Germany today.
Yes, I am. I'm normally based in San Francisco, but for the first time since the pandemic started, I was able to travel, and I'm really happy to be here and see everybody again after such a long time. But I will go back to San Francisco again in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, summer is always a great time to be here in Germany.
Yeah, and it's not the best time in San Francisco. I think somebody said that nothing is worse or colder than summer in San Francisco because of the fog.
Okay, great. So you have best of both the worlds. And okay, so coming back to your profile, so tell us a little bit about your journey from being a German diplomat to now an advisor in data policy and regulations in the US. I mean, it's a very interesting shift. How did one thing lead to another and you are doing what you are doing?
Yeah, maybe a red thread has always been that I always want to work on things that matter. I enjoy cross-functional work most. Things that matter, that sounds very mission driven. I think that's what I am, but I'm just very curious about things that have some relevance for me, also for the world. I studied international relations and European studies in Germany, and then went to California and finally completed my studies in France. Went to work at a major foreign policy think tank, and then at a commission outpost in Lebanon. I have a love for the Middle East. But then decided to enter the German diplomatic service and spent almost 15 years in various, what I found super interesting positions in government for Germany, but also for France and Italy. And I became fascinated with technology when I was part of negotiation teams on tech policy frameworks in Europe. My focus in that role was on drafting and coordinating policies for a new and smart regulation of technology. And during that time, actually, I was deeply involved in the beginning of GDPR negotiations on a European level. I mean, they took forever. They took 6 years all in all, but I was there at the beginning. And then in 2012, 9 years ago, I came to the US. And my job was to organize multi-stakeholder meetings and discussions between Germany and tech companies in Silicon Valley, and also to do communication work around that. So in a way, I combine being strong on content and being interested in content, but I also really like coordination and trust and relationship building. And so with that, I've been growing this really big network in the tech and regulation space. And so after those 3 years were over at the diplomatic outpost at kind of the intersection of tech and policy, I decided to become a tech policy consultant, bridging Europe and the US. So I can be in both places geographically and also in terms of disciplines for different clients. And right now I wear, let's say, two hats. One is that I'm working as a privacy professional. So I become part of trust and safety teams in tech companies in Europe and in the Bay Area. And I also do the same job for advisory firms and for non-profit foundations. And the main topic is compliance on privacy and data protection. So in Europe, that's the famous General Data Protection Regulation. But there's something like that also now in California. We can talk about that if you're interested in that later on. But I also do like consequence scanning, which is kind of a keyword recently in Silicon Valley, and on security. And so, I become really part of those engineering and product teams, and start out with data protection, and then also work on other policies that I help draft for those companies. And the second head is that because I wanted to work on geopolitics of tech regulation a bit more, maybe that's a continuation, or I wanted to, start something again that I really liked in diplomacy. The nonprofit Mozilla Foundation offered me that fellowship in residence that you mentioned. I started that last year, and I work on upcoming EU regulation on trustworthy AI. And that's kind of an analytical research-like work, but I do like to go out and talk with AI builders, and also with government experts, and lead workshops, and get my insights directly from tech companies building AI. And I'm also on the policy team at Mozilla Corporation, as opposed to the foundation. And so I help identify and monitor and analyze policy issues that affect Mozilla's products at both state, national, and international level. So the team there is really small, but still very global. And I'm glad I can contribute as someone who knows several regions of the world really well.
Wow. So, I mean, it's great that, you work on the public side also, and then you are pretty much in the tech hub, and you are dealing with all sort of, say, partners in this ecosystem. We will definitely discuss AI regulation in depth, but let's take a step back and go to GDPR. And we are sort of like obsessed in EU with that. And it's just completed 3 years. And now you can see like things are getting into place in EU. But what has broadly been its impact in Silicon Valley in these 3 years? Like what has worked, what has not worked, like a sort of report card of GDPR in Silicon Valley?
Yeah. So GDPR has had some really notable and immediate impacts worldwide. Well, first of all, in Europe, as you can witness, but it has also brought an awareness to Silicon Valley and the US that privacy is important to people in Europe, but also in other regions of the world, and that it's a human right that in the US many had not really considered important. But the surveys, even there among population, prove them wrong. So the global conversation around privacy has really shifted in the past, 3 years, but even before a little bit, but definitely since 2018. So have the laws. So as a direct result of GDPR in Europe, countries like Japan or Brazil passed GDPR-inspired privacy laws, and India and even China are considering their own law, even though those look different from what we think they should be. But, it's definitely a big push. And California's new privacy law, which went into effect in 2020, is a direct result of GDPR. And California is the first state in the United States to have set up a privacy protection agency at state level. No other US state has that, although in Europe, each member state has at least one on a national level. Germany 16 for every Bundesland. But in California, that's a first for the United States. And this agency has just taken up its work. It has a Spanish-born GDPR expert as a board member on a California state level of this agency. So I think that's really notable. And also, overall, in more geopolitical terms, GDPR has also shown to Silicon Valley that one of their biggest markets, Europe, has its own rules, and that they have to follow when they want to be a player there and earn money there. And as a result, many US-based organizations that process personal data of people around the world have decided to apply GDPR. and extend all the rights that go with it to their customers who don't need to be European residents, but who live outside of Europe. And this is the case for many companies around the world. It gives them an edge in global compliance, and it's easier for them in terms of handling complaints and requests. So, they say, just give all of our customers all the rights that Europeans have, which you don't have to. It's a very high bar, but it's still easier for the organization than to sort out the customer's location. Sometimes they only have an email address, or attribute different rights according to their location. I mean, that's really complicated when you have 100 different sets of terms and conditions. So GDPR offers them a legal framework and a set of standards that is, at least compared to other less spelled out legislation, or when there's no legislation at all, relatively clearly adoptable. So my clients are mainly small and medium enterprises based in the US, with only some clients in Europe, or sometimes just the mere intention of soon expanding to Europe. But this privacy management strategy, just take GDPR as a high level standard and apply it to everybody, has been found with bigger tech firms as well, because they appreciate that there's a standard now that is law in one part of the world, but can serve as a guideline also for other parts of the world. And that it's just easier to have one high profile standard than many different ones, what I call the growing global privacy patchwork. That made the EU the de facto rule setter in technology policy worldwide. So the whole perspective on European rule setting and on Europe as a factor in the tech industry has changed in a very short time in Silicon Valley. So narratives have changed, and internal data management has changed. I need to mention that a disappointing factor is enforcement. So even when tech companies do get hit with billion-dollar fines, for them, it's a tap on the wrist. And so far, GDPR hasn't changed the underlying business models. The way money is made on the internet with surveilling people's behavior. So it's not just the business model of a company; it's the entire internet that is based on a economic model that doesn't have privacy top of mind. So changing that, of course, requires fundamental and probably painful adjustments to the way things have been structured. That's definitely something that GDPR so far hasn't been able to achieve, and that's definitely a bit disappointing.
Mm-hmm. So there is GDPR in the US, in Europe, and there are also data regulations in the US. I think it's CIPP. So when you compare the standards, how compatible are these two, when implemented by companies together? Does my question make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mentioned this global privacy patchwork, and definitely, so the privacy law in effect in California is called CCPA, called California's Consumer Privacy Act. It will actually be replaced again soon by another one that's called CPRA, and it's a bit even an advanced version of CCPA, all abbreviations. But some principles are the same as GDPR, and then again, it has some elements that even go beyond GDPR, and I would say that enforcement of these will be very hard. I think in a way it's been a law that has been created very, very fast in a way that is maybe weird for us in Europe, by a petition of people, and that got a lot of signatures, and then actually pressed the California legislature to create that law very rapidly. So in a way, it's not as systematic, not as clear as GDPR. It does go further in some areas, which don't always make sense to a consumer because they're kind of hard to understand. But then they do have elements that have just nothing to do with with GDPR, or just are like, yeah, don't go as far. So it's a bit different. But I would say, that what's important is, so in a way, it's easier for companies, I would say, to comply with GDPR, and then just to say, and then add some important elements of CCPA, and hope for understanding on the part of enforcement agency. I have to say that enforcement is weak in California as well. So that's hard, of course, as a privacy professional, when you try to explain to companies that it's really important to follow the law, but then the whole enforcement is so yeah, there's so many deficits and there's so few people working on that. I think in the end, in California, it will be like usually in the US, it will be litigated in court mainly.
Okay. But as you just said that for big tech, probably this is not difficult as much, and they don't get so panicked about it because they have big legal teams and heavy pockets. And you said you deal mostly with SMEs, and I'm not sure if you deal with non-tech companies also, but what are particularly the challenges that these kind of companies face? And have there been any stories where they did something that they were not aware of was illegal, and then they had huge fee and fine? And so, I mean, take us through the struggles that that usually these kind of SMEs face with GDPR.
Yeah. So, so as I mentioned, I work as an independent privacy professional, both before GDPR became enforceable and then also after. And working mostly with small companies in the US, I've witnessed how hard it has been for those small startups outside of Europe, in a different legal system with a different understanding or traditional understanding of privacy, to understand why and how they're exposed to GDPR. My work, in a way, is both legal and technical, but it's also cultural. So I translate mentalities in a way, and what's important in Europe and why. And plus, like for a startup, of course, it costs time and money. And so they took a bit longer. I mean, I'm only one privacy professional. Many others worked on this as well, but still, there was a delay in adaptation, and it sometimes resulted in vendor agreement cancellations, which means that they lost business with other bigger firms. And yeah, I mean, we all lost great ideas and innovation and diversity among tech builders. So academically speaking, I did witness what's called the Brussels effect in California. As a, let's say, dyed-in-the-wool European integrationist, I did celebrate it. I thought it was really great that European style rules come to California, and I think overall it's a positive result. But I also witnessed how much easier it was for big tech to adapt, because they have a presence in Brussels. They have huge legal teams. They know about compliance, about loopholes, and this over time has been leading to more concentration of power in the hands of big tech. I wouldn't say that compliance is more difficult for startups or small firms. Actually, the opposite is true, because like very banal, they have less data to start with, because they're just starting to collect data from their users in their products. So in a way, it's easier for them to right away establish good and compliant data management systems. So what I always tell them is start early, have a system and follow it. And in a way, that's much easier than, to clean up a whole mess of collected data with like no legal basis, or that's you've been storing forever in some place because you might be using it for another product. So in a way, when you start early enough and you're aware of the rules, it is easier, and you just have to follow through. But that, of course, needs some kind of a shift in culture. But I think that shift has happened. It's also shown that some small companies, and the big ones now as well, use privacy as a marketing tool, but that sounds too negative. It's actually a big asset because consumers demand it. And so when you do that in a smart way as a small startup, you have huge tools at your hand. And so it's not negative when you start early, when you are aware of the rules, but also like upcoming principles, and you deploy them in your systems, in your products early on.
Yeah. No, I just like sort of picked up your line that they do it out of marketing, because I think this is also something we discussed in a podcast with Safia Noble, the author of Algorithms of Oppression. And I'm not sure if there is a word called like privacy washing, like you have greenwashing.
Yeah.
But probably it has become like a marketing gig to, talk about your customer data and how safe it is, and having discussions around that. So yeah, just a comment, not a question. But okay, now, so first we had GDPR, and now we have the proposed AI regulations in Europe, and we have never really spoken about it in this podcast. And so I would say that even me, or particularly the audience, are pretty new to this. So if you could, and you seem to be very deeply involved in this, so if you could take us through, what are actually these AI regulations that have been proposed in Europe, and what are their challenges, and then probably we can go deeper into it.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, the upcoming AI regulation that has been tabled by the Commission, but is only on the negotiation table now for member states and the European Parliament, is actually the core thing I'm working on in my fellowship. And my intention is really to make sure that this upcoming regulation, again from Europe, does not again cause that lagging behind of small players. Because in the field of AI, as you all know, size clearly matters. The more data you can gather, the better your AI system works. And we're already pretty far down the road to monopolization because few players in the market have access to an impressive range of data, and they can also afford gathering high quality data, which then enables them to build better performing AI. And for small scale providers, what's most important is the clarity of the guidance. I mean, that sounds banal. Who wouldn't say that? But if you follow advice, you set up an internal team analyzing those rules for your in-house implementation, adapted to your AI system, you get much better at estimating necessary additional processes. So that, to say why I work on that, and again, this link to the small scale providers of AI. In general, the regulatory draft that the European Commission, and it was tabled on April 21st, so that's not very long ago. And in Brussels, things take time. Committees are formed. But the draft that the European Commission tabled also has been a very long time in the making. Von der Leyen, the Commission president, announced something like it already at the beginning of her presidency, and then it came up, this year. It's the most ambitious and the most comprehensive attempt at reining in the risks linked to the deployment of AI that we have seen so far across the globe. So it's a bold new step. Before, the big focus of the past years were always just principles. I'm saying just, but I mean, of course, you start with principles on an international level. The OECD principles on AI that were adopted in May 2019. OECD, most European countries and the US are members of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. So they're already, they promoted uses of AI that are innovative, but also trustworthy, that respect human rights and democratic values. And I think now in 2021, really, we're at the stage of how do you transform these principles into practical rules and regulations? So the rules that the European Commission proposed wouldn't cover all AI systems. They do cover systems that are deemed to pose a significant risk to the safety and fundamental rights of people living in Europe. So it's again, it's this geographical scope of people living in the in Europe. So it's a risk-based approach. It has several layers, and those layers have different rules for different classes of AI systems. There are some that are prohibited. There are some that are considered high risk and have to follow certain rules. And then others where, they just say you have to be more transparent. Do you want me to go more into details of, what those rules are?
Yes, I mean, broadly, if you could point it out, one, two, three. I don't know if it can be done that way, but
Absolutely.
yeah.
Just, sometimes it's confusing because it's really so much of a risk. Like you have to know in which category your AI system falls, and that's really the, on the developers, kind of to understand the categories. And in the end, it's actually pretty clear that not many AI systems actually fall under that rule. So,
oh wow,
definitely something to understand. So for some uses of AI, the Commission proposes an outright ban. So that's a use where the Commission says it's an unacceptable threat to citizens. That, for example, it's an AI system that likely causes physical or psychological harm by manipulating a person's behavior. What that means, I mean, that's a question of definition, or by exploiting their vulnerabilities like age or disability. Then also something like social scoring systems where people, collect points and also minuses, like those we know in China. And facial recognition in public spaces by law enforcement authorities. So not all facial recognition, but just, those used by police in public spaces, essentially. Although even there you have exceptions, and I think too many of them. So that's, the systems that the Commission proposes should be, banned in Europe. But most of the regulatory draft actually focuses on AI that is considered high risk. And what is high risk is, of course, defined in the regulatory draft. So that's kind of problematic uses in the recruiting field, in the employment and admissions context, in determining a person's creditworthiness or eligibility for public services and benefits, and also some applications used in law enforcement and security and judiciary. And for those, these systems have to meet different requirements and undergo kind of a conformity assessment. So, of course, before they can be placed in the European market. So, in a way, that's kind of a FDA, as we call it in the US, like clinical testing for not for drugs or for vaccines, but for algorithms. It's, to make sure that an AI system complies with several requirements around serious risk management. It has to use data sets in training, validation, and testing that are relevant, representative, free of errors, complete. That's a super tall order, of course. Then documentation about a high-risk AI system must be really extensive and very precise. Why you chose certain designs, why you designed it in a specific way, and also, to show that the developers really checked all these factors diligently. There has to be, the keyword is always human oversight. So high-risk AI systems must be designed in a way that allows people to understand the capabilities and the limitations of a system and to counter the so-called automation bias, and also, if necessary, reverse or override the output.
Yeah.
And then, of course, accuracy, robustness, security, and transparency. So this is kind of this clinical testing for algorithms.
So, do you see, because there have also been some articles criticizing, I think, I mean, that's why we have media, right? But do you see any loopholes like in this regulation, proposed AI regulation, or do you feel that there was some, I mean, in terms of your learnings, do you see any challenges or loopholes in this?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, of course, we only have a draft so far, and already the European Parliament and also other bodies in Europe have already called for much stricter rules in some elements of the draft. So certain member states will definitely also, have their say on. I mean, all of them will have their say, but certain member states are of the opinion that it should be stricter in some cases. So this is not the final word. I Well, in my personal opinion, I do think that the exceptions for facial recognition, just to take one big, part of what people expected of this regulatory draft, are too wide. So it's just difficult when you ban very specific uses of facial recognition, but then actually in industry or private uses, there's no ban at all. And so even in the uses of law enforcement, you have certain areas where it can be used. So in a way, like practically speaking, law enforcement in Europe will buy facial recognition systems on the market wherever they're produced and use them in those specific cases that they would be allowed to. And how do you really want to make sure that they don't use them for other things? So I think that's a huge loophole. And then, of course, and I think it's really dangerous. So, I really don't want to sound alarmist, but in a way, I do think that facial recognition has a potential to actually undermine our free society. That sounds big, but I do think it is a big danger.
Yeah.
And I mean, there is also other things that we're kind of used to in the European regulatory process. Some rules are just very loosely defined, and over time, with use, once it's in effect, we will better understand what's actually meant by it, or maybe get guidance, but definitely also from practical life, court decisions, practical use cases, all of that, just like in GDPR, wasn't or isn't always clear. But for me, in the end, so there's a lot to criticize about this draft. It's definitely one that has been drafted in a part of the commission that is mostly interested in encouraging AI development in Europe. So just to make it a more competitive market, and not like the legal and the justice oriented and human rights oriented experts in the commission. So that
Oh, wow.
I think it shows. But for me, the most important thing is actually that there is some draft on the table in one part of the world, and other places will look at it and decide if it's something that they want to, adopt as well, or create differently, but still discuss what it can and what it can't do. I don't think it's a coincidence that just before the commission published its proposal, and the date was, public, the United States Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, published a reminder that it's watching closely what AI systems companies to use, and that they really have to make sure that there's no bias in those systems and no discrimination, resulting from its use. So I I'm pretty hopeful that there will be some collaboration in making rules compatible between the United States and Europe. There's been some really positive signs already from the US administration that the US wants to work with the EU in this field. Because in the end, let's not forget that the United States and Europe share values and commitments to protecting rights and human dignity. It sounds cheesy, but I do believe it's true at the core. We compared to the rest of the world, we have a lot in common, and we have certain values that are at stake. We should go back to those roots and know that if we let AI develop completely unregulated, those core values of our democracies are at stake, and that's not alarmist, as I mentioned. It's not like some science fiction. It's actually already happening in a lot of developments. So I think, that's a very good reason to cooperate internationally on these rules.
Yeah. Actually, that's a very interesting perspective, because one of my next questions, I don't know if it's null and void now, but I was going to ask you that if regulation is going to impact innovation in AI, but you just mentioned that this is a very pro-innovation kind of regulation. So I would rather reframe it and ask you that how do innovation and regulations in AI go hand in hand?
Yeah. Well, as a matter of principle, I don't believe regulation stifles in innovation. Very often in my daily life, I work with technologies who feel that actually regulation gives them some guardrails that they actually appreciate, as a matter of fact. I think, on the contrary, smart regulation that gets out in front of emerging technology can protect consumers and drive innovation. So my focus is on protecting consumers, and that I think is the most important thing. I mean, we're not just a huge, couple billion of just like mice in a lab. We are people with rights and dignity. And it feels to me that policymakers have kind of, over the last decades, forgotten that regulation can be beneficial, and that, it's not always just good to give industry players free rein, just to deploy technologies according to their business model, because there's also, definitely an increasing backlash against tech companies. People kind of have this suspicion, kind of a dark suspicion, that these companies are interested primarily in promoting their own dominance. Very low trust. I mean, there are surveys that show this very clearly. The technology companies enjoy very low trust in general. But then, I mean, they do sell their products, but people don't trust them. And as a result, this is when policymakers at state and local level actually begin to consider technology bans. And that's starting mostly at those lower local and state levels. But I think that at some point, and it's already happening at a higher level, they're also talking about that. In Europe, faster than in other places. But as I said, I think those who know AI development well and who warn of unguarded development are often considered, that they're overreacting to science fiction speculation, but actually they're really creepy AI systems already deployed in real life. Examples that I really find creepy are those algorithmic selection systems in hiring interviews that are actually based on biased data. So you could say that, well, it's just a really badly built product, but I mean, they're just let loose on people before being tested or checked, and they cause real harm. Or mood detection systems in music apps. Spotify presented something like that. It sounds fun, but actually those systems put people in categories, and they reinforce sometimes dangerous cliches. They do, as a matter of fact, not comply with existing consumer protection laws or non-discrimination laws, or actually just basic principles of decency. So
Yeah.
I think what's changing right now in the US is that the idea that the technology sector is in some way different from other industry sectors, that it needs more freedoms and exceptions to general market rules, that's fading. And agencies are more looking into how to apply their existing rules around competition also, or antitrust called in the US, and consumer protection, safety, non-discrimination to technology. And that's very similar in Europe. I think it's time that we consider the technology sector as a normal part of our economies that doesn't need and shouldn't enjoy exceptions or special protection compared to other more regulated industries.
Yeah. And also, I think generally people are redefining innovation. It's that sentiment, but beautifully put, and also a very positive note to come to concluding statements for the today's episode. So, Yula, if you had, if there was one thing you would want our audience to take away from today's discussion, what would it be? Very broad question.
Yeah, very broad, but let me think of something good for you. I think what I really want is that people look at technology, as I just mentioned, as, one industry among many, that should be centered around us people who use it as a tool, and it should not be a cause in itself. So those companies don't need some special status. They're not like small innovation sparks anymore. There are, our biggest and most costly and most powerful economic players. And so we should really kind of put turn around the picture and say, like, who are you there for? Are you there for us, or are you there for just sucking up power and money? And so if we say that you're there for us, and to for us to really benefit of all the really positive and promising uses that not only AI but technology in general can have for humanity, let's also create smart and easily understandable rules that make sure that we don't just say, oops, yeah, that was a mistake, I'm sorry that I just destroyed your existence, and so we have to make sure that the human is at the center, and that AI, or in general technology, is a tool for humans, and that humans are still created equal and have dignity as an individual.
Yeah. And we try to do a bit by interviewing people like you.
Yay.
And it was such a pleasure. It was a spontaneous, plan that we had to record this, but it turned out so great. So I'm so happy that we could host you after all this chase of months to get you on Voices of Data Economy. And thank you for being here today.
Thank you, Diksha. It was a really nice conversation.